All right, welcome to the Healing Your Pet podcast. I'm Jesse, and this is
I'm Alex Roberts.
the husband and wife healing pet team here. So we were going to discuss this time around, talking about rotating foods for both cats and dogs. So we both spent a lot of time working in like pet supplies industry. That means mainly just pet food, and many people would think that they had to just feed the same food all the time. They would literally come in and say things like, well, I've been feeding my dog the same food, the same flavor for the last, 5 years, and he doesn't like it all of a sudden. What's going on? Well, you should rotate food all the time. And it's good for all kinds of things. So we're going to first discuss why you should regularly rotate your pet's food, both cats and dogs.
Yep, absolutely. And of course, I've got to just throw my veterinarian spin on it. It is always valid if your animal ever suddenly stops eating, is suddenly not interested in their food. It is 100% valid for you to have some concern, and I will always recommend take your animal into the vet, just make sure everything is okay. It's just that in reality, I have found that the majority of times they end up being fine, and like Jesse said, they're bored. It happens, and it's understandable if you think about it that way. Yeah, I don't want to eat the same thing day in and day out for years. I'd get bored a lot faster than 5 years in. So,
Yep.
Can't blame them. So yeah, and again, we're just going to try and make this really neutral. Everything's going to apply basically equally to dogs and cats. If I say anything along the way that I think is different, I'll say so. I would say really the only major difference, and you can go back and listen to our last couple episodes, we talked about how to switch your pet's food for dogs and cats. Cats just tend to be pickier. Switching foods tends to be trickier. So you can listen to our hot tips on switching cat food in the last episode.
And we did dog the week before that.
Yeah. So, the main reasons, your big reasons why it's so important, why we say it's so important to switch continually rotating foods. One, avoid your pet becoming a quote-unquote picky eater, which is really just they're bored. And some animals do, of course, tend to inherently be pickier. Cats.
Mm-hmm.
And really, like any toy or small breed of dog, they're notoriously picky eaters. But rotating your food can be like the simplest and often most effective solution to that problem, because then you prevent boredom and voila, your animal's suddenly no longer super picky. And then another huge reason is...
Can I just throw something in there real quick?
Yes,
about the
throw
board
something
thing?
in.
All right, so when it comes to cats especially, cats become addicted to things, and it's like an evolutionary mechanism, so that way they don't consider themselves being poisoned. Essentially, they build up this certain, basically an addiction to whatever they're eating, and they will not eat anything else after a while. So that's why it's really important, like as soon as you get a cat, especially kittens too, is just to rotate their food. Otherwise it's next to impossible to get them to switch. Sorry, you can continue now.
No, that was a good interjection. Yeah, that's great. If you get a kitten, feed them something different every day. Just get them used to food being different, and that's not poison. That it's okay. Yeah, 100%. That was a really good point. So avoid boredom at picky eaters. The next one is avoiding food sensitivities and true allergies. When you eat the same thing constantly, you're more likely for your body to essentially decide that thing is a problem and it can't handle it anymore. And you actually develop an allergy to whatever it is you've been eating, or more likely a sensitivity than a true allergy. But So there's big reason number 2. And my number 3 is, I say, balance is how we achieve health. So the more you can balance, and really the more you can switch things up, ultimately, the more you are balancing the diet in the long term. And that's what's really important. It's not the importance of, oh, every single meal my animal eats is perfectly balanced. That's not true balance, because that's, in the real world, that is impossible. That doesn't exist. Our individual needs within our body, like on a biochemical, physiological level, are constantly changing. So if you eat the exact same thing, even if it is quote unquote complete and balanced, you just can't achieve true balance, so you can never achieve true health. So the more we can switch it up, the better we're keeping it balanced, the better we can achieve true health. So I'd say those are the important reasons why. It's my turn for an interjection now. I realized you're wearing your hat for Margro Farms, and I'm wearing my Margro Farms t-shirt today.
Yeah.
So we're supporting our local farm today.
Yeah.
So support your local farms.
Yeah.
All right, that's the end of my interjection.
Well, I mean, you kind of interjected on yourself, so I don't know if we called that an interjection, but anyways, all right. So there is a way to go about doing this too, and proteins you should switch to at different times and things like that, which we'll get into. So how, I guess, if you're going to do this, how should you rotate food just to be safe, or to do it the most financially beneficial way you can?
Yep. So to start with, understanding what do we even mean by rotating food. To be honest, it can kind of mean different things depending on what boat you're in, what boat your pet is in, so we kind of have to look at it from different angles here. So it can mean we are sticking within...
Sorry about the spaceship taking off in the background, by the way. It's just the dryer.
It's our dryer. So it can mean sticking within one brand, within one type of food, even if that's kibble. So if you are feeding kibble and you stick within that brand of food because that's just, the best you can do, and you found a brand that's working for your animal, cool. What you can do then within that brand is rotate through the different quote-unquote flavor options, which I just say the different proteins that they offer, because for the most part that's what's changing, is the main protein they use in that flavor. So that's one way to rotate. That's a very realistic, doable thing to do for most people, and we get it that the majority of people, like you're feeding kibble, so there's a way that you can, kind of level up, is just switching as frequently as possible the flavor, the protein that you're feeding within that kibble. That's awesome. It really is. That's a really simple improvement you can do. And for most people, like I say, so, people ask me, well, how often should I be switching? Well, ideally, every day you'd feed them something different, but, then you'd have to have all these different bags open simultaneously, which is definitely not a good thing. We actually want to use up those bags as quickly as possible, and we'll have to get into the details of that in a later episode. But so the realistic thing to do is I just tell people go once you're at the end of whatever bag you're on now, just get a different flavor next time, and just continually get a different flavor whenever you're ready to buy a new bag. Doesn't really make any difference to you, and then it's an improvement for your animal, so kind of a win-win there. So another category that I mean by rotating is actually changing up the brand of food. So some animals, you know, if you've got that like retriever type dog that just has an iron stomach, you can feed them anything. You know, they'll do often just fine going cold turkey from one brand to the next, or totally switching types of food, like going from a kibble to a canned food, or to a dehydrated food, or a canned food to a raw food, like, you know, just anything. There are dogs that do just fine going cold turkey from one extreme to the next. I don't recommend experimenting with that if you don't already know that you have a dog that can handle that. Always take it slow. We have a whole episode on that too. But there are dogs that can handle that, and if your dog can handle that, awesome. It's honestly, I consider that a sign of health. If they have a gut that can handle a pretty drastic switch like that, cold turkey, it's honestly a good sign. So yeah, in that case, switching up the brands you're feeding, awesome. I mean, if you're feeding a fresh food, and what I'd consider fresh food is either like a commercial raw food or a homemade diet, whether you're doing a raw or a gently cooked homemade diet, those definitely all qualify as what I consider fresh diets. There are a lot of quote-unquote gently cooked fresh diets commercially available now. Some of them, I don't know, honestly, some of them are so carbohydrate laden, I just kind of have a hard time considering them fresh food. That gets a bit complicated, but technically qualify as fresh. So if your dog is on some kind of fresh diet, generally that makes it a lot easier to rotate through the different brands you're feeding, because their gut is going to be inherently healthier when they're eating the more minimally processed foods. Those foods are not constantly damaging the gut, so the gut should be able to handle a little bit of a bigger jump on a regular basis, you know, going from brand to brand, not just flavor to flavor. And if you fall into that category, awesome. Pretty much same rules apply as long as you have found that your animal can handle jumping between brands. Just switch it up as much as possible. You know, of course, within any category of food, there are some brands that are better than others, but tons of options out there now. And with homemade food, of course, you have tons of options, because you can do whatever the heck you want with homemade food. That's one of the huge perks of it. So really easy to rotate there. And that's the easiest way to rotate really frequently. You know, you can feed something different every day, much more feasibly if you're doing a homemade diet. But we know that is the minority of people. So don't worry if that's not you. And then, I guess I kind of talked about this, but just rotating the type of food, again, if you have an animal that can handle this, and you know, if you're not in the boat where you have the time and or finances to do a fresh diet all the time, but you know, you can kind of get it in there sometimes, awesome. You know, if you kind of, even if you're using like a kibble as the basis of your pet's food, and then you're, you know, sometimes you can get some canned food, you know, do a couple days of canned food, cool. Maybe you can get a box or a bag of dehydrated food once every few months, awesome. You know, maybe once every few months you can get a box or a bag of raw food, or maybe you go through a period where you've got a little extra time, you do some homemade food. You know, that's awesome. Again, as long as your pet is essentially healthy enough to handle that change, rotating, drastic rotation of the different types of food like that is also, it's good. You know, it's really, yeah, it's never a bad thing as long as your pet can handle it. Because if your pet can't handle it, then it's not so fun. But
so I guess in that same vein, what about if your dog, so some people feed like a grain-free food, or, you know, regularly, or a, you know, ancestral grain or whatever. I'm assuming when you rotate foods, though, you want to stick within that type, right? I guess, or does it depend on the dog when it comes to whether or not they're sensitive as it is?
Yeah. I'm gonna say it depends on that one. It's a very good point, and yeah, honestly, it depends. And we are going to, like, that specifically, grain food versus grain-free food. We're gonna do at least one whole episode addressing that specifically, but if you have a dog that doesn't have specific sensitivities, and this, I mean, really this applies to kibble mostly. I guess like kibble and canned food, and dehydrated food, I suppose. But if you have a dog that does not have sensitivities to any of the, specific grains that might be in question within the brand, or brands that you're using, then, or the grain replacers that might be used in the grain-free foods within the brand or brands that you're using, then it's generally, it's fine to switch between them, grain and non-grain, for a variety of reasons. When we're talking about kibble especially, there has to be a lot of carbs in there in order for it to be formed into kibble. So if it's not a grain that's being used as the carbohydrate, you gotta use something as a carbohydrate. So being grain-free, it's not like decreasing the amount of carbohydrates used, really. So as long as your dog can handle the carbohydrate, whatever plant product is being used as the carb in that bag of food, then cool, switch it up. It's good to switch it up because, again, you're preventing then developing sensitivities or allergies to said carbohydrates by not having them on the same one all the time.
And that you're saying dog in that instance. For cats, I mean, you should really try to avoid grains if you can. Ever, cats should not have them. So keep that in mind when rotating foods too. So when it comes to picking a protein to use, what's the name of this traditional Chinese medicine? What's like the actual term for it? Is it just like the thermal composition of the meat? What do you call that?
It's the
Great, we're both gonna draw a blank here.
Now you're gonna make me have a brain fart. It is the food energetics.
Okay, the food energetics.
That is the official term. Wow, I had a moment there.
So in traditional Chinese medicine, it applies to pet food too. You can choose the protein you want to give to your dog or cat based off of current health issues or their body condition or the season. So this may sound kind of confusing if you're just now learning about this, but it's not that complicated. We just got to learn out what the different compositions of the proteins are, but I'm sure this is right up her alley. So
yeah, so this is, I mean, we could easily do a whole podcast on just understanding this, but I just want to kind of give you a basic idea because sometimes people like to have a basis of like, well, what protein should I choose now? So this is for those of you, it's a little bit of an ideal world type thing, and then also just for those of you that are like, well, I want some kind of basis for how I decide on what protein I'm using. So basically in traditional Chinese medicine / traditional Chinese veterinary medicines, TCM / TCVM, you have cooling, neutral, and then warming and hot proteins. In truly traditional Chinese medicine, the warming is, some people say it's not really a thing, but anyway, not that important. So I'm just going to give you, just for some ideas, the most common proteins used in pet foods that fall into those categories. So for cooling, duck, rabbit, and white fishes. So like pollock, a lot of foods are actually labeled whitefish, but like whitefish, pollock, I don't know. Those are probably the big ones that you would see labeled. A lot, some things that say like ocean fish. I mean, to be honest, who knows what that really is? That's why the manufacturer uses that term. It's kind of like mystery fish meat, but generally whatever ocean fish is would kind of fall into the more cooling category too. Cod, that's actually a good example too. So,
I'm not gonna get that anyways, but
yeah, good luck finding sea bass in pet food,
Yeah.
most expensive food ever. I want sea bass. Anyway, then neutral foods are like pork and beef. Those are going to be the main neutral foods that you'll find. Warming, turkey is the main warming food that you'll find. So salmon is, I don't know, it's kind of, people kind of disagree over where salmon falls, but it seems like it's a warming food, give or take. And then hot foods are, there's quite a few hot foods. So chicken is a hot food. So that's a little confusing. Turkey is considered more warming, whereas chicken is definitely a hot protein. Venison is a hot protein, and lamb is a hot protein. So those are the big ones, and hopefully that helps you think about that a little bit. So as far as how do we apply these things, so an easy one is the seasons. So when it's cooler outside, it's nice to feed a warmer protein, right? So a warming or a hot protein, good to feed those in the winter. When it's hot outside, good to feed a cooling or at least a neutral protein, just kind of avoiding those, at least the hot proteins in the summer, And again, is this going to cause serious damage in your animal if you're feeding a hot protein in the summer or cold protein in the winter? No. We're kind of talking like perfect world. And again, just helpful to think about. Some people really like having this to think about as a basis for making a decision. So seasons, that's an easy one. We can also talk about the constitution of your individual animals, and that's basically just who they are. It can kind of change through the seasons of life, when they're younger versus older, and if they have health problems or not, but their true constitution, at least hypothetically, doesn't change. But some basic things that you know about your animal are they the type of creature that seeks more warm places or more cool places? So, for example, do they like to sleep on top of the heat vent? Do they like to nap in the sun all day long? It's like they'll be out in the sun. It's like, how are you not cooking to death? And they're like, no, don't make me come into the air conditioning. I love heat stroke, Okay? So those are animals that they're desiring that more warming. They kind of have a more cool type constitution. They're desiring a more warming or hot food. And then the opposite, if you have an animal that's wants to be in front of the fan, it's winter, but they're sleeping on your cold wood or stone floor, they're stretched out panting. And of course, especially with dogs, a lot of breeds, you have a Arctic breed, you've got a Husky, a Malamute, a Samoyed, they're gonna fall into that category. They're always hot, And then you've got some little, short-haired, smaller dog that, actually, hair dogs specifically, so, poodles, etc., tend to be cold more easily because they don't have fur to insulate them properly. So, whatever your animal is seeking, if they're more heat-seeking, then think, okay, give them more warming, heating foods. If they are cool-seeking, give them those more cooling foods. Kind of help balance them out. And health needs. So this is another thing to think about as far as which proteins to use. And I made there way too many examples to list, but some general ideas. So like younger versus older animals, younger animals tend to be these high energy, outgoing, so they might need a little bit more of or could benefit from more of cooling proteins. The older you get, you tend to slow down, a little more low energy, kind of chilled out. They can benefit from more warming proteins. If you have animals that are, if they have, as far as like general ideas for health problems they might have, so if they've got like red, if they're really itchy, like dry, flaky skin, especially if these are like acute problems, those are more like hot problems, so we want to give them more cooling foods. Then the opposite, if you have more of like a chronic kind of slow burn disease, especially if we're talking about like chronic organ disease or failure, those are more like cold diseases, so we want to add in some warmth to kind of try and bring those things back to life, so we can use heating foods to help out with that. And I think I'm going to cut myself off there with the TCM talk, trying to keep it easily digestible for today, just little tidbits to think about.
So yeah, just in that, along that line of thinking, eventually, like she said, they'll probably go into that in more depth somewhere along the road here. But just in the meantime, consider this, think about it whenever you go to the store, to just keep in mind that it's always a good idea to rotate, and don't feel like you're doing the wrong thing by making that choice, because it's just like humans, we should always rotate. You shouldn't eat the same thing every single time you eat, or even the same same regimen of food every day. So just think about that, and I guess really just do what works best for you as far as budgetary concerns, or knowing your budgetary, right? Is that not what the word?
I don't know. Is that a word?
Budgetary? Why is it
budgetary?
Based off your budget? Okay. Budgetary is definitely a word.
Okay. I don't know.
Now I'm looking it up because you got me thinking I'm losing my mind.
Prove me wrong.
So
It just sounds silly.
Budgetary is relating to or in accordance with an estimate of income or an expenditure. So yes, I'm not wrong.
Budgetary.
Anyways, so if you have
Makes me think of a budget.
monetary concerns, I guess, for her sake, keep that in mind. Keep your animals' constitution in mind. How they are better than anybody, and this applies to both cats and dogs. And just go back and listen to all the other stuff we have talked about. We have talked about the different types of food, what's more beneficial for dogs, what's more beneficial for cats. So maybe look back on that, and it'll help you make decisions. So is there anything else you want to add?
I don't think so. Yeah, moral of my story is pretty much the more you can rotate within your scenario for both you and your pet, the better. The more the merrier. But do what's reasonable. You gotta I always want to tell people, like, do what works for you, do what is reasonable, stick within your budget, and do the best you can within your means.
Yep, your budgetary means.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll be back with you next week. So please, if you could just give us some love in the likes and the subscribes and all that stuff. If you know people that have any questions about this stuff,
In the commentaries.
in the commentary, yeah. If you have anybody that has any questions about this stuff, just send them our way. I mean, all that stuff's there. The earlier podcasts are there. They're not going anywhere. So go back and just use those as informational pieces if you need to. And even if you're not going to listen to this or somebody that's not going to sit there and listen to this every episode, at least you can show them the info that they need is out there. And we have experience in doing this, so we know what works. All right, well, that'll be it for this week, and then we'll be back with another one next weekend, next Sunday.
Can I throw a tidbit in really quick?
Sure.
I just want to say, I think we kind of mentioned this in the beginning. and all. First of all, as far as our experience, we did talk about that specifically, like in our intro episode. But in case you don't believe us, but we are trying. This is just like a reminder, I guess, or maybe a clarification. We're trying to start off. We're still. Our podcast is in its infancy here,
Yeah.
so we're trying to start off with like the basics, stuff that just applies to everybody, just trying to be as helpful as possible with covering all of, again, like what we consider the basics that we can think of off the bat, and kind of moving on from there. So we have a lot of different disease topics that eventually we'll get into, and a lot of, and we plan on trying to get into doing like homemade food as much as possible. We're never gonna have one podcast episode that's going to magically equip you to go home and make a complete diet, because it's just impossible. But we're gonna do our best to give you all the pieces to put together with time, at least. So just putting that out there as this is kind of where we're starting, and we're working our way up so that we will expand into kind of little bit more niche.
Yeah, more with a higher level of expertise would probably be the way to put it. Because obviously right now this podcast, if you want to nerd out over pet nutrition or pet science, this probably hasn't been your thing yet, because it's just like beginner level stuff. So we will get into that stuff later on down the road, because that's her thing. So she could talk to you about it for hours and hours and hours, and she would love to do it. So we will get there eventually. All right, well, we are saying goodbye for this week. See you next Sunday. Bye.
Bye.